us a little bit about you and your role at MBM and sort of how you've got to this place of being an asset management expert.
Sure. So I started off my career in 2010, where I graduated from the University of Adelaide in a double degree in engineering and finance. Ended up working as part of the graduate program with a company then called Transfield Services, who have effectively now sort of evolved through a number of iterations into Ventia.
Yeah.
So Transfield was rebranded to Broad Spectrum. Broad Spectrum was acquired by Ferrovial, a Spanish conglomerate. Mm-hmm. And then Ferrovial sort of sold the business and then Ventia sort of acquired that business. So this was in 2010. I spent 4.5 years sort of doing different bits and pieces within Transfield, from sort of traditional FM, finance roles, looking at things like mobilization and transition management, and financial reporting and financial accounting in the FM contract management, the consolidation of contracts within FM under what was then the Transfield business. Mm-hmm. And then spent about 4.5 years with them, and then ended up moving to another consultancy specialized in property management advisory and transaction advisory. And so a lot of the work there was around leasing, transaction, tenant representation, looking at things like acting on behalf of tenants in terms of lease transactions,
what's
market
in their
rent
best
reviews.
interests.
Yeah, that's right. Looking at things like, lease terms and lease schedules and lease contracts and the like, agreements for leases. So that was really two sides to that business. There was the transaction advisory piece, and then there was the sort of property management advisory and FM advisory. Mm-hmm. So that business, when I was there, we put a lot of the sort of FM contracts together, a lot of the property management contracts together, in terms of the schedules and the scope of works and the payment mechanisms and the performance management frameworks. And I was working at the time jointly with MBM, who were writing an FM contract for a client. That consultancy was writing the property management contract for the same client.
Yeah.
And so 8 years ago, I was offered a role as a senior advisor with MBM. MBM's a quantity surveying professional advisory services firm. The main business is quantity surveying, cost planning, cost management, and the like. Yeah. And then there's a separate vertical. That vertical is what we sort of classify as asset advisory. And there's really three key branches within the asset advisory vertical. There's one that I co-direct, which is FM and asset management advisory. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that sort of my remit sort of is looking at advising clients on their FM strategies, looking at things like, is it in-house versus outsourced, or is it a hybrid model for the operations and maintenance of large estates, portfolios, and the like. We do a lot of sort of maturity assessments and performance audits, and we look at the contemporary standard for FM, which is 41,000, and the asset management standard, which is 55,000. Yes. And so we look at things like developing asset management frameworks and strategic asset management plans. So we sort of support clients in looking at what they have, what do they own or what do they operate, and how do they spend their money? Where should they allocate or appropriate their funds based on what sort of priority, and how does that liability look like in terms of investment over the sort of 10, 20, 30 years? The other two sort of branches that we have is one is a building surveying business, and they would go out and do asset data capture, condition assessments, dilapidation reporting, defect analysis, technical due diligence on buildings for acquisitions, and make good. And then we also have a tax business as well. So whilst that sits within the asset advisory vertical, it's really a QS function, and they would do tax depreciation schedules and reinstatement cost assessments.
Do it all.
Purpose. Yeah. So that's, if you look at the business across the sort of two verticals, you almost have the whole of life, right?
Yeah.
You got the construction piece, which is very upfront. Someone, you might need to build a new hospital or whatever it is. Yes. So all that construction cost management is upfront, and then you've got the sort of the long-term
management.
operations and maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. And you said something interesting before. You often will advise on whether it should be in-house, external management. I'm always surprised by some of the larger companies that have gone in-house and they just haven't gone through an outsourced firm. Like, is there a standard that you go, oh, when it's a certain size or if it's a certain industry? Like, what leans you to advise going external as opposed to internal?
Look, there's no one size fits all approach. Everyone's different with different complexities and different needs,
Yes.
and different
All
requirements.
unique.
My view is when I'm advising clients, like data is fundamental. It's a fundamental input into to understanding how they should be structuring their operating model.
Yeah.
So those that have, really good data sets that are complete and accurate, like asset registers as an example, that helps formulate decisions, as part of a decision tree matrix, if you like, on what the right strategy could be.
Yeah.
In the absence of a lot of that, you're limited in terms of the model, particularly for outsourcing. And within the outsourcing realm, there's different FM models, right? You can have semi-comprehensive contracts, you can have fully comprehensive contracts, you can have PPP type of contracts. Should we turn that off? So there's no one size fits all approach. It depends on where the organization is at with regards to their own maturity in terms of FM practice. We're seeing some trends in industry more broadly around a lot of the breakdown of sort of integrated FM type of contract arrangements into more discrete trade services. But it's all going to be subject to the type of data, information, understanding their process. Different sectors have, again, different sort of trends as well.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting observation to see what's happening in the market more broadly.
Yeah.
What are some examples of good data versus bad data when you're engaging with a client that you're hoping they're collecting?
We would have written probably, hundreds of FM contracts, right? There's not one client that's got a complete asset register or data set. I've never seen it in my time in sort of,
University of Melbourne is pretty close.
Yeah.
They've got this
there's
amazing
a few
digital
in
estate.
that space.
But even Jade from there who built their digital estate said he's finding out every day of something new that he didn't know existed. So
and there's one thing to have to understand, your buildings, but then do you have things like condition or criticality? Do you have your condition indexes and your sort of what your forward works liability looks like? It's good data is what do you have?
Yeah.
What condition is it in?
yes.
And what's your total lifecycle liability look like? If they have that, they're off to a great start.
And good data would be considered live data as well, right? Because
So typically the master
if it's
data,
not kept updated, it's bad data.
the transactional data is not as important as the master data. So things like historical work order records, it's nice to have. It informs things like your service model, and it's really good when you're undertaking procurement or tendering activities because you can supply that to the market and it gives you some robustness around pricing and controlling risk or risk contingency that tenderers may put into their submissions. So data is king. I mean, that's the sort of key takeaway that, if you don't have the data, you can absolutely put a procurement strategy together and undertake that, but it's just going to be a different operating model. It'll be more of a management type of contract arrangement versus a comprehensive or semi-comprehensive because tenderers can't, the contractors, they can't take a risk position on it. So they'll, typically services cost, maintenance costs are passed through until they have a full understanding of the total state and health of the asset base. Yeah.
The whole integrated facility services model that's becoming more and more prevalent, it's obviously got a place. Do you think that there's some limits to how, let's say, oftentimes they'll bring in an integrated facility services group that will slowly get rid of different services and start to self-deliver all those services under their banner, this management company. And so oftentimes the facility or the group of facilities who once had a really strong network of experts in different fields, they had HVAC experts and roofing experts and everything. Now this company that they've got in to manage it has slowly done away with all that outsourcing and brought it all in-house. Do you think there's limits to that in terms of you're now not getting the industry experts, you're getting a team that's sort of generalised?
There's advantages and disadvantages
yes,
of each.
There's a place
Absolutely,
obviously.
that is an occurrence.
Yeah.
There is a cost for specialization.
Yes.
Versus generalization.
Yeah.
It also, there's a degree of interdependency with the internal, property function or FM function or asset management function, right? So in terms of resource capacity and capability. So if you have an internal team, for example, and you're managing a large portfolio and there's only 5 of you for a massive estate, you have no choice but to outsource the management of the portfolio because you just don't have the internal capacity to do so. So I think you're right. But again, you can structure your model such that some of the specialized services, you can mandate under the commercial framework to say that, we want, for this particular subservice line, we want you to go to a specialist.
Yeah.
And you might have a pre-qualified list of those specialists that they need for the provision of those services. So yeah.
Because some of my fear in the movement towards this integrated service model is that you lose some of the quality. And so that while there is cost in specialists, there's also cost in generalizing and risk of shortening lifespan of certain assets and running them to failure, which is sometimes also a necessary thing.
So one of the the core tenets, if you like, of asset management is this triumvirate of cost, performance, and risk, and the balance of that. So typically, when you reduce risk, you either reduce the performance of the asset base or you increase cost. Conversely, if you increase the performance of the asset, you increase risk and increase cost. So it's a balancing act that you just need to find in terms of its appropriateness for you. How do you manage cost, performance, and risk? And what's the appropriate underpinning FM model to deliver that balance appropriately?
And is there a way to get all three?
No.
Does it come down to data?
If you've got an infinite budget, if there is. But you need to sort of satisfy a number of different criteria to be able to do so.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. So you talk a little bit about the main difference between FM and asset management.
Yeah. They're
really two roles, but oftentimes they're lumped into one role.
Sure.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Look, they are an asset manager and a facilities manager. They actually have very different skill sets and very different motivations as well for the role. I like to see it as two sides of the same coin. For me, asset management is all about the value realization for the asset. And it's much more strategic in its sort of hierarchy. So it has a long-term view. It looks at value. FM, on the other hand, is much more around sort of the way that the standard really describes it is around people, process, and place. And so it's not so much about the value realization, but it's more around the short-term operational, the day-to-day, planned preventative maintenance, reactive maintenance, looking at the day-to-day firefighting of an asset, the management of that asset on a day-to-day basis versus the long-term view, which is more around asset management. So there's sort of some of the key differences between those roles and those functions as they perform. But ultimately, like I said, that one coin, opposite sides.
They work very closely hand in hand, and in some of the larger facility services, you probably have them as separate roles. But in some of the smaller ones that we work with, they're often doing the same thing.
One or two people
doing. That you mentioned that the facility side is more reactive. The asset management looks at the value and the life, because I think most FMs who have to hold on to both roles, they struggle to be able to manage the assets well because they're just constantly living in the reactive space. And we often talk with them about it's better to be proactive than reactive, and as much as you can be proactive, but they're constantly chasing their tail.
Yeah.
Because they're just juggling so many balls.
Yeah. But interesting. I mean, the asset management view is, you've got an asset base. When do you need to replace that? When do you need to repair it or refurbish it, right? So it's more of a long, you need to understand what the sort of 10, 15, 20 year time horizon looks like. For an FM, you're not as concerned. That's not to say that you aren't, but your concern is the day-to-day operations of that building or that asset.
And the clients you're serving.
Exactly right. Yeah.
It's a very people-based role.
It is. And so hence people, process, place, because that's, that's the view for FM. So I said before, they're very different skill sets and they're very different motivations as well. You're right. The FM role is very much the conjugate between the physical infrastructure, the plant and equipment, and the people and the place. Asset management is much more, I guess, more strategic in nature because it's about a long-term view. It's typically a financial view as well. So it's quite interesting to see how the FM and asset management markets and models have sort of changed over the last sort of 10, 15 years.
And the two should really inform each other, right? Like they should inform each other's decisions. Massively.
On the asset management side, so trying to have a 15, 20-year mindset and out view while technology is rapidly changing, the contract that you might be on might not be for that long. How do you balance that?
So often, we put together a lot of the sort of plans and the lifecycle models, and they typically have a long-term view. Anywhere from sort of 10 years all the way to sort of 50. Often it becomes, you can make an argument that it becomes sort of redundant after 5 years for budget purposes and financial planning because just of so much change.
You never know what's coming.
You just don't know what's coming. I think, and typically most assets have, if you're talking about particular systems, plant and equipment, sort of 7 to 12 year lifespan, air conditioning systems, fire assets and the like, but anywhere between sort of 7 and 12. So, you wouldn't want to sort of look at forecasting any longer than sort of 15 years, particularly with the change in technology. There's now sustainability considerations which is an input into decision making around, selecting materials or selecting different types of plant and equipment. So I often advise, my clients that they shouldn't look at, unless it's a PPP type of a concession agreement, there's no need to look at a 30-year term. You could reforecast your modeling in a couple of years once you have a better understanding of the condition of your assets, their health, their performance, how are they being utilized, what's the demand on them in terms of consumption, do you have redundancy systems in place? So all of that needs to be, you put that together as a framework and that better informs your decision making in the shorter term.
We do a lot of work with ANZ Bank around the country. When they built their flagship building in Melbourne, 833 Collins, they every level, it was in that era where every level had a different colour carpet and they're bright colours and very light. And we were brought in to manage and maintain the carpets, and carpets have a 15-year warranty. And so they were like, let's just try and get as long a lifespan as we can out of these. We're about 16 years in, I think. And the carpets still look as good as new. So much so that they haven't had to replace them. They're worn a little bit in certain high traffic areas, but the colour and stuff is the same. And so much so that the carpet manufacturers are like, we want them to replace it, but they keep reforecasting like, we can get another year or two out of this. And they're just starting to look at replacing the carpet. So that reforecasting and being able to pivot, but having a longer term plan is really important, I think.
And I think in that particular example, they've obviously been maintaining them and repairing them where it's needed. So it's been looked after, right? So you absolutely need to consider things like utilization in high traffic areas for carpet replacement long term. But if it's being maintained and upkept, then you could extend that lifespan, and then therefore you could look at recalibrating what your cost profile looks like as well.
And that cost in that triangle that you were talking about before, that cost has been real. Like they've lowered their costs and their outputs dramatically because lots of commercial tenancies replace 5 to 7
years,
years.
yeah.
And so they're throwing millions of dollars down the drain because it's an expensive asset. Whereas they've been able to push that and delay that expenditure of brand new carpets across their whole building out by years.
It's interesting because if you look at the total whole of life cost, typically up front, your construction cost and your installation or your procurement costs are, they're 20 to 30% of the total cost of operations or the total cost of ownership. It's really that the 70% is all around operations and maintenance and disposal or repurposing or refurbishing the asset at the end of its life. So over the long-term view, if you take it over 50 years, up to 80% of the cost is actually, after the asset's been built or installed.
Wow.
Yeah.
And getting in early is obviously the smart thing because otherwise if you don't, you're sort of forced into that running it to the end of life. Where do you see that as being the
right solution?
The right solution, running to end of life?
Yeah, it's not a bad strategy. It's probably often misunderstood.
Yes, I think so.
If assets are mothballed or you have surplus assets, like you might have buildings that are sitting as redundant assets, and you have a long-term view for them. You might look to sort of repurpose or redevelop. Then a run to fail sort of strategy is not a bad idea.
Yeah,
because you want to mitigate your cost exposure in the short term, and you know that you're going to be redeveloping the asset, in the sort of next 2 or 3, 4 years, whatever the case may be. Just have to be cognizant that if you do have any assets that there may be some statutory maintenance obligations for those assets, so you need to keep maintaining the statutory equipment according to legislation.
What are some examples of that?
Things like fire systems, essential safety measures, systems. You might have some. You need to meet certain obligations. For things like your Form 3s or your annual fire safety statements. So you have to do that, but other maintenance requirements that aren't statutory, you don't necessarily need to because you know that you are going to be redeveloping or disposing or adaptive reuse or whatever the case may be for that asset.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like a car. I've got a 15-year-old car at the moment and we are running it to fail. We're not going to, we don't think there's any resale value left, but we're going to keep the brakes working, keep the headlights on, keep all those things happening.
Make sure you fill in the oil.
Yeah, the roof's currently sagging. I'm not spending any money on that. That's not worthwhile. But on a macro level, very similar.
Yeah.
So in your role in advising, so let's say a firm comes to you and says, here, what should we do with this? What's your first sort of questions that you start to ask and what do you look at?
Yeah. Often when we're approached for advisory services, clients either know they have a problem, or they don't know yet that they have a problem or what that problem is, but they know that there's something going on.
Amiss.
They need help.
They need help, but they just don't know what it is. So a lot of the work is problem definition and understanding where what are the key sort of pain points and issues and challenges that they're experiencing. And then what do they need to do about it? So we often come in and we have a couple of processes that we undertake. They're generally similar in nature for different challenges and different asset types and complexity issues that they might have. So we often have a look at things. We do a literature review, so we have a look at their processes and their practices and their plans, and we say, do you have an asset management plan? Do you have an FM plan? If so, what's in there? Is it contemporary against sort of, against practice, industry practice?
Best practice.
So we have a look at all their literature, their data, their asset registers, their expenditure profiles, their OPEX, their CAPEX, their TOTEX, and all the X's, and we see, we try and work out, well, what's missing? Is there any gaps? What are the opportunities for improvement from that literature? So that's quite qualitative in nature. There's some quantitative aspects of that as well, because we're looking at how much are they spending, and then we can sort of say, well, is that expenditure, is that again as a benchmark, how does that compare to industry for their sector or the services that they're providing? Then we have sort of a series of stakeholder conversations within the business, right? The executive, the FM teams, the property teams, the asset management teams, the users of the asset base.
Yeah.
Who, for what purpose are they using the asset for? And again, we ask them the question, what's worked well? Because it's also very important to understand what is working well, you don't want to change, and what are the weaknesses, what are the pain points, what are the opportunities for improvement. So they help us identify through engagement, stakeholder engagement. We typically either interview staff or we get them to fill out a questionnaire. We do a combination of both. And so the outcomes from those processes are the fundamental input into a maturity assessment or a performance audit. And we use a number of rating tools where we say you're at level 1 or you're at level 3, which is competent. Level 1 being needs improvement, whatever the scenarios are, and that's fine. That's just a score. It's not so much what score you get; it's then what you do. What you do afterwards.
Yeah.
So how do you implement the changes that are required from the outcome of that review to increase your maturity from sort of point A to point B? What does that roadmap look like?
Yeah.
What's the blueprint for the change?
Yes.
And then, again, not so much, here's your blueprint, but what's the value as an outcome from moving from A to B?
Yeah.
So you're either reducing your risk, you're reducing your cost, or you're increasing the performance of your assets.
You spoke about the first part is problem definition. How do they know there's a problem that they don't know about and they need to come to you? Are there symptoms that show up within an organisation that kind of signal they need some extra help?
Sometimes they are going through a change. They might be consolidating. So they've got in a commercial environment, for example, they might have 4 or 5 sites and they might be consolidating into one.
Yeah.
So that triggers investigation, like a diagnostic review into, we've been operating this way. Is that now we're consolidating? Is this still the right way to operate?
Yeah.
Often they need to find savings. Commercially. Often they have been exposed to risks, like something's fallen, from the roof, and they've identified hazards. They might have had an engineer come in, and the engineering report has said that there are issues with the integrity of the building, and we just need to understand, has that not been maintained appropriately? Like, do we need to look at our FM approach? So there are a number of sort of reasons. Often they want to understand whether or not they're performing in accordance with sort of practice, good practice.
Yes.
So that's sort of, there are other possibilities as well, but largely those are the ones.
It's almost like, how relationship counselors or psychologists will say, most people come to us when there's a problem. You need to come to us before there's a problem so that we can help you get ahead of the problems. Sounds like that's why what facilities and companies should be doing with their assets is coming to advisors like yourselves before they notice the problems.
Right. Often it's too late. In other circumstances, they've got a contract coming up for renewal or retendering, and then we'll get engaged 12 months in advance because they might not have the capacity to do that themselves. Or again, they want to understand, what's changed in industry in the last 3 or 4 years? What does the new FM landscape look like? There's been a lot of activity in the FM world around acquisitions and looking at a lot of mergers as well. So that's changed. So there's contracts all the time. You can appreciate that it's quite resource intensive for contractors to bid on these opportunities. So there's a lot of market movements, and sometimes they just need advice on what's the market look like, or how do we develop a performance framework with KPIs, and how do we consider things like incentives and abatements, or what are the other sort of carrots and sticks that we can put into a contract arrangement? We just don't know. And, what are our peers doing in the sector as well? So often we're engaged to sort of advise on that.
You mentioned just then, like, keeping their finger on the pulse, and the FM world is changing. What are some of the things you're seeing at the moment changing in the landscape of the FM world? What are some trends that you're seeing?
So we're seeing a lot of the sort of tier ones looking at moving away from a sort of traditional managing contractor model where they're self-delivering a lot of trade services, and they're bundling that capability. So it's more of like an integrated trades model rather than an integrated FM. So they're not just acting as a management layer on top and managing service outcomes, but they're also self-performing a lot of the works, whether it's electrical services, mechanical services. And so I spoke about the acquisition activity over the last sort of 5 years. We're seeing a lot of that in the market from the supply side.
Yes.
I think from the demand side, clients are becoming a lot more sophisticated and a lot more rigorous around the identifying the opportunity. So, and that's sort of making its way into a lot of the collateral, the contract collateral and the tendering collateral as well. Yes, there's still some challenges with regards to data and asset registers, but that, you know, we're seeing clients become a lot more sophisticated in that way.
There's a long way to go when it comes to data and asset registers. Sometimes we just want a floor plan, and a facility manager's like,
and so we get an iPhone photo of the evacuation truck at the back of the door. Say, can you use this?
That's the start.
Yeah. We'll come in with the measuring tape. Don't you worry. Yeah.
Leave it to us. That's it. In terms of some of the you mentioned before some of the stuff with AI, where are you seeing that going?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. We're seeing a lot of the predictive analytics now inform maintenance regimes.
Yep.
So things like sensors and IoT and the like, a lot of that can go into an AI platform and tell you, predict when they think the asset's going to fail. And so you could change your maintenance principles. So instead of maintaining an asset every 6 months or in terms of frequency or every 3 months or whatever it may be, again, if it's a non-statutory asset item, you could effectively reduce the frequency of maintenance and therefore your cost liability. So seeing a lot of predictive analytics and things like the advancement of reliability-centered maintenance or FAMICA analysis through AI.
Yes.
There's some sustainability initiatives as well, which I'm not really too across, to be honest. But yeah, I think it's that whole maintenance regime overlaid with AI is an interesting space. Yeah.
Are there any examples that come to mind straight away where that's being used? Are you seeing that being used just yet? Sorry to put you on the
No, so one of the things I sit on the FMA committee in New South Wales, and so we're about to schedule in an AI in FM panel session. So whilst I don't have any particular examples, I'm sure that the experts certainly do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The team of the FMA will love that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
They get mentioned every episode.
They were just mentioned before.
It's great.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about your involvement with the FMA.
I've been with the committee for about 3 years.
Yep.
And I think, my sort of value add to the committee is really, because it's membership driven, it's really about brokering introductions with the right type of people so that they can, when we're hosting an event or establishing an event, whether it's a panel session or a debate or for World FM Day as an example, or for International Women's Day, then, my sort of, who are the right speakers based on the theme or the discussion points of that event? Is it sustainability? Is it tech? Is it data? Whatever it may be, I can find the right sort of people to speak at those events. So that's sort of largely been my involvement over the last sort of couple of years.
Well, because you'd be quite well networked in the advisory space. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
If you were speaking to a brand new FM, just stepped into the role, what's the one piece of advice you would want to give them?
I think, can I give two?
Oh, you can give.
I'll give two.
These
so
little FMs can
I
bring
think
you
up
too small.
Yeah.
Give three.
Let me narrow it down as tightly as I can. I think one would be understand your stakeholders.
Yeah.
Know who's who, and who has the degrees of influence so that you can do your job. and know your building or know your asset. So, get to know your asset as quickly as you can, because it's effectively, you've got your stakeholders that you're managing, you've got the asset that you're managing, and once you can do that, you'll succeed in your role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is that for a lot of the FMs that are doing the both and, they're having to be the face, and they're getting all the people problems coming at them while they've got all these assets they're trying to, all the data. And oftentimes they're, like you said, they're two completely different skill sets, but they're two different personality types, really. There's the extrovert people person who's like, I can get this done. They're the smiley face. Everyone wants to love them. And as a company, you need everyone to love the FM. But then they've also got to have that very detail-focused ability. So that understanding your stakeholders, understanding your people and your client, but also understanding your assets, I think a really good piece.
One of the things I like to do in the FM is the advocacy piece. So I think FMs might not be given the right level of sort of credibility that they deserve.
Yeah, 100%.
And they're not, they're sort of here in the organization, right? And that's very, I think that needs to change in the industry in terms of the value proposition that an FM has, right? Yeah. They're just not there to fix the toilet. They're not just there to take a reaction, a call because something's not working. It's often considered a cost base as well. So often it's a cost center. Like FM is a cost center, not a profit center, and there's the value isn't recognized. So I think there's a bit of work for us to do collectively as an industry, broadly, to sort of elevate the role of an FM and the value that they provide an organization.
We definitely see them as the unsung heroes when you go into a building. And often if they're doing their job really well, people don't know about it. Yeah. It's all the stuff that they don't get thanked for because problems aren't arising.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been such a pleasure to have you. I think you're a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of FMs are going to find this episode really interesting and valuable.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. If anyone wants to connect with you online, LinkedIn's the best way.
LinkedIn's great. Yep.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, George.
Cheers.